Welcome back, listeners, to the BizBlend podcast where business meets real, raw talk. And growth isn't just about the numbers, it's about creating lasting impact. I'm your host, Sana, and today in this episode, we are diving into a topic that feels more urgent than ever: inclusive entrepreneurship. Now, what does it really mean to build wealth in spaces that have historically been denied access? How do we redefine who gets a seat at the table or who builds the table first itself? So, listeners, joining me is someone who doesn't just talk about these questions, she lives the answers. Meet Elaine Rasmussen, a former Wall Street wealth analyst. She's now a force for economic justice. As founder and CEO of Social Impact Now and ConnectUP Institute, she's helped over 400 underestimated entrepreneurs access the capital and tools they need to thrive. She's leading multi-million dollar integrated capital fund focused on building generational wealth in communities that have too often been left out of the conversation. And Ellen has this unique ability to make complex systems personal and also bold, which may sound impossible or maybe difficult ideas actionable. She challenges the way we think about leadership, legacy, and the true meaning of wealth. So, everyone, get ready for an energetic, unfiltered conversation packed with tactical wisdom and, as always, a dash of fun. So, with that, Ellen, welcome to the show, and it is such an honor to have you with us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Beautiful, beautiful. Elaine, inspiring journey. You have transitioned from Wall Street to championing inclusive wealth. So, what sparked that shift, and what have you learned about the gaps in how all this capital is distributed?
Yes. So thank you for that question. So the way that this really hit me, I started my career as a stock analyst, and this was back in the 80s, a very, very different time. And I actually, after doing that job, which I loved, but when I looked around, I think at the time I was the only woman who wasn't a secretary. And I believe I was the only woman of color, and I think there were only a couple of people of color who worked in that particular office, which happened to be in Santa Barbara, California, which happens to be a not, at that time, very diverse community. So while I love my job, I felt like I didn't have the emotional fortitude to stay in finance as a career. So I actually pivoted and did a whole career in marketing, communications, and public relations. But around 15 years ago, found myself circling back, and I was in a conference, and it was an impact investing conference. And I went to this session. It was before the conference, and it was talking about. It was a very small group of people, about 45, 50 people talking about impact investing. And the way that they were introducing themselves were, my name is so and so, I'm from so and so organization, and I have X millions or billions of dollars of assets under management. Now, because I had a finance background, I knew what all of this meant, and I knew the terms that were thrown around. And as I was listening to everybody introduce themselves, I was doing a back of the envelope calculation of how
Mhm.
much money was in the room and how few people who look like me were in the room. I think there were 5 women, and I think there were 3 people of color. And I started having this existential crisis of like, how did I get into this room? Who am I to be in this room with all of this money? And then it just
Mhm.
hit me. I'm like, "Oh, I was put in this room because I have this unique perspective, and we need to change how money moves. And we need to stop having the conversation of there isn't enough money. There is plenty enough money. We just need to redirect how money moves." And then it was a lightning rod moment of, this is now going to be my personal mission of life. I'm here to move billions of dollars in a very different way than it has moved to the places that could actually have the greatest impact, not only on our economy, but on our communities, and actually help us build the communities we actually want to see, where everyone gets to thrive, not just some people get to thrive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. That is inspiring, Elaine. And sometimes access to capital, it can often feel like an insider's game, kind of reserved for those who already know the rules. And this might, this definitely can kind of stop or maybe block, or may oversee brilliant entrepreneurs simply because maybe they didn't fit the mold. So, Elaine, what drove you to step out of that system and rewrite those rules?
Well, the thing for me, going back to your previous question about the gaps. So when I had a business, I'd been a serial entrepreneur, but I'd been a solo entrepreneur. This last time that I started my business in 2017, it was the first time I actually wanted to grow and build a business. The previous times that I had a business, I call myself an accidental entrepreneur. I fell into it by accident and grew a business, and it was great. And I eventually closed that business and went back to a traditional job for a lot of various reasons. But this last time in 2017, when I decided I actually wanted to start and grow a business, I was doing really
Mhm.
well for 2 years. And then things started to shift and change. And I realized, oh, I don't know how to grow a business. I never had to learn how to grow a business, like a scalable business. I'd grown other people's businesses, but I'd never grown my own business. And that was a very different thing. And so when I went to go and find help and the resources that I needed, I started to see something very quickly. So I'm a strategist just by nature. So I started looking around and I'm like, oh, the information and resources that were out there were for people who had never started a business before. And so I like to use a baseball analogy. There were a lot of resources that could help me get to first base. And there were a lot of resources, especially capital, if I was already on third base. But what was missing was everything in the middle. How does somebody move from first to second and second to third? And that was the big blue ocean that I was really seeing in my entrepreneur ecosystem as far as helping me develop and grow as a business owner. And how do I get from $1 million to $5 million? Because that's a very different that's a very that requires you to operate in a very different way that maybe no one has taught you or that you don't have an orientation towards. And so I literally, after going around and asking people and going to different resources, I I nobody was really valuable in helping me get the answers that I was looking for. So it was at that point I said, "You know who can help me? Other entrepreneurs." So I literally started just hosting conversations with entrepreneurs on a monthly basis. I would order food and I would tell entrepreneurs to come. And I said, "All we're all going to put our problems on the table, and hopefully somebody at this table can help solve our problem." And it worked. And everybody was helping each other, and everybody had different answers and experiences. And then from there, everybody started talking about capital and access to capital, and they were all having issues accessing capital. And I said, okay, having come from impact investing, I'm like, is capital really the problem? I don't know that that's really the problem. So I said, well, the best way for me to answer this question is let me start convening investors. So once again, I just started hosting conversations with investors and started asking them, like, what were they invested in? Why were they invested in that? Why weren't they looking at different opportunities? What would prevent them from investing in different opportunities of people who look like me, particularly like service based businesses or consumer packaged good businesses, which investors tend to shy away from. And when I got the answers, I really started to see very quickly where the disconnect was. One, there was no disconnect that there was no intentional opportunity other than pitch competitions to put investors and entrepreneurs in the same room for the basis of
Mhm.
building relationship. Because at the end of the day, people invest in people that they know. But if
Yep.
you come from a community that has been left on the margins, how to your point, how do you get into the secret handshake? How do you get into the room? And if you're an investor who actually wants to invest in your community, you want to invest locally, how do you find those people? So that was problem number one. Problem number two was the conversation that the investors were having was so misaligned from the opportunities that were available. And they had no one or no place that was educating them on how to reframe their thinking to actually get the impact that they were looking for, both in the financially, but also socially, to be able to do what they were trying to do. And then thirdly, it was clear that there were a number of gatekeepers, right? Particularly at the ecosystem level, that weren't trying to be really intentional about matchmaking or informing investors on how they can do their work better, but also preparing entrepreneurs to be better prepared for those conversations. So at that point, I was like, oh, bringing people together strategically is what I'm really good at, particularly as a having a marketing background. That's all you're doing is strategic alignment and strategic partnerships. So in
Mm.
2018, I created a conference that was really meant to solve all three of those problems, called the the ConnectUP Summit, where I brought together 200 entrepreneurs, investors, and ecosystem partners for deep relationship building, information, and tactical, intentional networking.
Wow. That is like analytical, creative, and the power of community. Oh, so many things to learn from here, for all the entrepreneurs out there as well. So thank you for sharing that, Elaine. Now let's talk about the reality check here.
Yes, yes.
So when we talk about inclusive entrepreneurship, what are some of the biggest misconceptions? When we talk about inclusivity, I kind of often see it as, one of the checklists or the checkbox, which has to be ticked about. But where do you see the real disconnect between good intentions and real impact?
Oh my gosh, such a great question. So I'll talk about this from two perspectives: the perspective of the founder and the perspective of investors or sources of capital. So from the
Mhm.
entrepreneur perspective, I think we're so conditioned to hustle, right? And what I tell
Mm.
founders is you need hustle. You need hustle is what makes you pursue a podcast like you, right? People will
Yeah.
tell you, like, that's silly, that's crazy. You might even tell yourself, no one wants to hear me talk about these things. And but you persist and you do it anyway. And you're like figuring it out on the way. You're building the plane while you're flying it. And that's amazing. But there comes a point where you then have to become strategic. And I think in
Mm.
this day of hustle culture, particularly that's perpetrated by music, it's perpetrated by pop culture of like, stay on your hustle, stay on your game. It's like, no, there comes a point where you got to look further than just reacting, because that's what hustle is. It's constantly reacting. And you've got to be thinking about, how will I get from 100 units to 1,000 units, or 1,000 units to 10,000 units, and 10,000 units to 1,000,000 units, right? What does that mean? And what does that look like? And what might be the things I need to put in place, like standard operating procedures and things like that? So I think we mistake, as entrepreneurs, of I'm going to
Mm.
hustle my way to success, whatever success, however you define success. So I think that's the first thing. From the ecosystem perspective, or from the source of capital perspective, I think, to the point that you made when we started the show, is the we when somebody doesn't have an lived experience that you have, they can't understand the value of the conversation you're bringing or the business that you're bringing. So I'll give you an example. There's a local
Mm.
university here. I sit on a judging competition around social entrepreneurs. For 2 years in a row, there were students of color. There were teams of students of color who created different uh, 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 businesses. One was an app that helped international students, when they came to United States, acculturate to the community that they're living in. So it was kind of like, for lack of a better term, like a mini Facebook community, where if an
Mm.
international student was coming to Minneapolis, Minnesota, they could learn some of the mannerisms. What were some of the coded language? Where is a good place to hang out? Where is a good place to find other international students? Like, it gave them sort of this, like, introduction or onboarding or orientation to the community that they were living in. And my fellow judges didn't think that that was valuable. And I had to start to explain to them, as somebody who's traveled internationally, this is such an important thing. But because that was not their lived experience, they couldn't understand the value and the market opportunity. I'm like, do you have any idea how many international students come to United States? And that the marketability of US students going to other countries, like, they
Mhm.
couldn't see the scalability that I could see really, really clearly. But because I traveled and studied abroad, I knew what the problem was that they were solving. But they were discounted as far as the valuable and scalability of the company because the people who were judging had no lived experience. And I find that and it's hard for you as the entrepreneur to explain to somebody, no, this experience is a real thing. And we see this like with Black women and their hair products, right? Investors don't see their products as scalable, or don't see, because they don't understand that the problem that they're solving impacts so many women who have the same hair texture, right? And that's globally, not even just the United States, but globally. So of course somebody, or even we take about gender, right? I have many of the women who come up with female reproductive products or menstruation products have often been overlooked by male investors because they don't understand the problem. And they not only do they not understand the problem, they didn't try to understand the problem. They just discounted it and then invested in another guy, right? So, and so for you as the entrepreneur, you're constantly facing these headwaters which can make you feel invalidated, make you feel like what you're doing isn't important, and it really gets hard to swim past all of that and persevere. But once again, if you've got hustle in you, you're going to persevere anyway, but you do eventually have to move from that hustle mentality to like really being thoughtful and strategic and intentional about the moves that you make.
That is that is 100% right. It may sound, especially to early entrepreneurs, a bit overwhelming, but I absolutely agree with you, because yes, hustle is required, but then you have to be again pragmatic, you know,
Right.
strategic and thoughtful, as you mentioned. So, um, that is really really such an important takeaway. And you often talk about, Ellen, and you touched down upon this, about capital readiness for underestimated entrepreneurs, because many founders who get so focused on polishing their pitch decks, I have seen this in my corporate career as well, that while polishing their pitch decks, they kind of miss the deeper preparation needed for real capital conversations. As you gave some brilliant examples in there, things like, other than the market scenario, or the target market, or anything, the demand or something like that, mindset, systems, or even like personal finance alignment. So, what exactly true capital readiness involve, especially for those who might not have the same networks or resources to lean on?
That's such a great question. So when I think about capital readiness and when I talk to my founders and my investors about capital readiness, I talk about it from the lens of a couple of things. First of all, I whenever I'm coaching a business, the first question that I start off with, I have two questions that I start every conversation with. The first is, what is the life that this business is supposed to be designing? Because we often don't, particularly women, we don't start businesses to start businesses. We start businesses because we see that there's a life that we want to have, that this
Right.
business will facilitate and create. So,
Right.
why that's so important is I deal with founders in all different kinds of capacities. I have founders that are in very rural parts of the country, and I deal with founders that are in urban. And when talk to, like, I'll give you an example. I've got one woman that I work with. She has 5 children. She lives in rural Minnesota, and she has a daughter that is epileptic. When I asked her the question, one of her things that's really important to her is, I need to be able to be available to my epileptic daughter for 24/7. Okay, so then what that tells me as a business strategist for her is, we have to design a business that makes her available for her daughter who is epileptic. So that is going to put parameters on what kind of business we create, not the scope and the scale of the business, but what kind of business we create. So a business that really requires her to be in an office every day is not the business that we can create. The second question that I ask founders is, what does success look like? Because I think that that's another question. Everybody's not trying to be the next Amazon. Everybody's not trying to be the next Starbucks. Some people are very happy being the only coffee shop in their community and building a lifestyle business for themselves. So if that's the business that we're building, let's be very clear about that, because I'm not going to talk to you about going out and getting private equity investment or angel investors. If we just need to drive sales, right? That's a very different problem than if we really are trying to grow a multi-million-dollar company. So when we start off with that, then that helps me be very clear about all the other things of how the business model, all of those things, and then leading to the capital readiness. So, we're going to need to build this business through lines of credit. We're going to need to build this business with business loans, as opposed to, which is a very different thing than going out and get angel investing or crowdfunding or private equity investment. So first we've got to have that conversation. Then when we get into that's maybe the philosophical capital readiness. Then there's the mindset, right? Because many of us come with trauma around money. I don't know about you, but I grew up with stories being told of never borrow money. Well, that's very contraindicative. If you're trying to grow a business, you have to borrow money to grow the business. You can't, I tell entrepreneurs, you can't make enough sales to put back into the business, because as your sales go up, so do your expenses. So you're going to need to borrow capital in order to bridge the gap, to be able to buy the equipment, buy the human capital to be able to grow the business. So that's one thing. But then when we talk about, and then the third piece of it is, okay, if we are growing a multi-million-dollar business, then capital readiness then goes into the operational capital readiness, operational pieces of the business of, yes, to your point, do you understand what your customer acquisition costs? Do you know what your cost of goods sold? Do you know at what particular point you start to get volume discounts where you can add more percentage to your profit? Do you know what your profit margin is? Are you hitting that profit margin on a regular basis? When are the times that you're busy? What products are selling the most? That's all being, and I tell my founders, I'm like, most of you will never get private equity investment just because of the nature of your business. And so don't spend your time on a pitch, because on a pitch deck, because the pitch deck is not going to serve you. You need to be able to tell the financial story of your business. That is the most important thing that you need to be able to do. Even if in that story there are bumps like, hey, I declared a bankruptcy. It's not about the fact that you had a bankruptcy or you had a business close. It's really about, what did you learn from that and how are you shifting the business to make sure that that never happens again? So those are the elements that I think about when I talk to my founders about capital readiness. It's the psychological, the philosophical and psychological. It's the the kind of operational, and then there's sort of the aspirational.
Absolutely, absolutely. Perfect words. Operational, but aspirational as well. It's like you are not only guiding um with what's right for business, but it's holistically right for the founder or the entrepreneur and the business as well. And
Exactly.
it cannot be same for everyone. So
Right.
that is really, really, really insightful, Ellen. Really insightful. Personally for me as well. Okay, so before we wrap up, Ellen, of course, one of the most important and very inspiring aspect of your work is you talk about the power of community, investing in community, and I got that sense from your journey. I mean, how you started with all of this and how you sit down with entrepreneurs, uh, while on the table, maybe lunch or brunch or anything, but you talk about their business, their aspirations, their dreams. So um but you also emphasized on community investment as a part of that wealth building process. So, how can entrepreneurs start thinking beyond personal success to include reinvesting in their communities? I mean, are there any specific models or strategies that you have observed which could help build wealth collectively, not just individually.
Yes. So there's a few parts of this.
Mm,
One, going back to your good intention. So when I think about the outside in, right? So your community and you, I think going back to your question about good intentions, I find that the road, my grandmother used to say the road to hell is paved in good intentions. We need to be more thoughtful about the things we do, and are we causing harm, or are we being additive, or are we being are we taking away? And so
mhm,
that's where I think we have to be better about asking more questions before we act, right? So instead of just presuming, "Oh, I'm gonna make this connection to this corporation to now be a customer." You might need to talk to the entrepreneur first, because the worst thing that you would want them to do is to make an introduction and not be able to follow through on that introduction. Meaning, if you're saying, "Hey, I know this company is, they're making X widgets, and I'm gonna do this email out of the blue because I really want them to be able to move from X widgets to Y widgets," you know, without talking with them, you might put them in a situation where they're gonna commit themselves to it because they're like, "Oh, like, this is a really great opportunity, and I don't wanna say no," and the opportunity ends up, like, killing the business, right? So just being more thoughtful, about, what are we asking for? I think the other thing that we ask entrepreneurs is we ask them to do stuff for free, and we shouldn't ask them to
mhm,
do things for free. I think our good intention is, "Oh, we wanna create a stage for them," but they still need to run the business. And so really being thoughtful and mindful of, like, once again, are we being extractive? But then going back to your question about community building and involving the community, and how do we as an entrepreneur give back to our community? I think looking for opportunities, if you're able to buy from your local businesses, prioritize buying from local businesses. Yes, it's a little, you might have to pay a little bit more, you might have to travel outside of your way, but then we have to make that effort, because then we can't be upset when we start to see our community close down, when we start to see empty buildings, when we start to see, people in our community moving out of the community. They've moved out of the community because people are not practicing their purchasing power, right? And then when it comes to the entrepreneur, I always tell entrepreneurs, if you've ever traveled, if you've ever gone on a plane, the safety announcement is, if mask comes down, your breathing mask comes down, put it on yourself first before you help other people. I find that entrepreneurs, they naturally want to help other people, and that's great, but I always tell them, they're like, "Oh, I wanna do a give back," and I'm like, "Do a give back when you've had 6 months of consistent sales. That's when I need you to do a give back, because right now you're actually not in a financial position or an operational position to help other people. Let's put your mask on first. Let's build the business up, and then you can do whatever you want. You wanna give 10% of your sales or 5% of your sales to a charity, you wanna give 5% back to, you wanna give, have people buy one, give one. Like, wait till the business is on stable ground, because
mhm,
if you go under, then you've actually defeated the whole goal of what you were trying to do to reinvest in your community. So build up your business, make it a strong backbone, make it solid, and then you can decide what does that look like as far as giving? Does that mean you're going to invest in other entrepreneurs? Does that mean you're going to give to a local charity? Does that, whatever that looks like, but build up your business first. Take care of home first before you go out and try to save the world.
absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, lovely, lovely. Ellen, so before we wrap up, if our listeners would like to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Absolutely, they can connect with me. I think I sent you my link tree. You can
Mhm.
just link tree me at Do Different Better. Anything that I've got coming up, whether it be workshops or upcoming shows on my podcast, Do Different Better, you can access there. But also, you can reach out onto me on Instagram at Do Different Better, as well as LinkedIn at y.elaine Rasmussen. I'm the only brown Elaine Rasmussen, so I should be easy to find.
Oh, great, great. I'll make sure to have all the links mentioned in the show notes. And Elaine, what a powerful conversation we had today. Pragmatic, practical, yet so inspirational conversation. I'm really walking away with a whole new lens on what it means to build wealth. Not just for ourselves, but for our communities, for future generations, and for the systems we are part of. So Thank you so much, Elaine.
Thank you. It was a delight. I really appreciated the conversation. Thank you.
So, to all of the BizBlend listeners out there, here is my invitation to you. What's one thing you can do differently about after hearing this? Maybe it's rethinking how you fund your business, or maybe it's mentoring someone who's underestimated, or maybe it's just asking tougher questions about the systems you're working within. Don't let today's insights sit on the shelf. Take them into your world and act on them. And to connect with Ellen, just refer to the show notes along with this episode. And if this episode sparks something within you, please share it. Leave us a review. Let us know what was the most insightful takeaway for you. And let's amplify these conversations because inclusive entrepreneurship is the future. And we all have a role to play here. Until next time, this is your host Sana, and this is BizBlend, where we blend business, boldness, and the belief that we can build something better together. Thank you.